But now we're moving on to one of the biggest voices in Scottish sports broadcasting, David Begg, who we'll talk to in a wee minute. David has been a commentator on matches that a lot of us can only dream of even having been at. So we'll hear from David in a wee minute. But first, we've got a wee selection of the people who've worked with him over the years talking about why David Begg is special to them.
Excitable, brilliant, dedicated, the best ever. Genius, spine-tingling, and quite simply, commentate.
Pickler turns into the box. Big space, left me shot. Oh, and a goal by Charlie Nicholas, the Prince of goal scorers. A goal from Zidane. Pandemonium in Paris. Oh, Scotland!
He had a great voice for radio commentary. You know, for me, he was by far the best.
Particularly in the European games of the Scottish team, where I'm playing against the opposition, he seems to crank the volume up and the excitement even more.
I think it just made you feel as if you were not a listener, you know, you were actually at the game.
McDonald puts against something on the left end, takes the goalkeeper and puts the ball in the net. And Donovan will have a famous victory. And Ali McLeison's Rangers, as things stand, will be champions.
You know, to speak the way that he does in radio is an absolute gift.
Beggy, I know we're not great at originality when it comes to nicknames in the BBC, but we are good at commentators, and David Begg was the best. For 3 decades he was the voice of football on BBC Radio Scotland, a voice rich in resonance, clarity and precision, and unmistakably Scottish. I'm Chick Young, and ladies and gentlemen, your match commentator is David Begg.
Back towards the 18-yard line. Up there comes McLeish, a header down. A chance for Aberdeen in goal. Start for the Dons. The corner gets back onto the 18-yard line. The header in from Alex McLeish, missed by the Spanish defence. After it gave Eric Black from only 3 yards to touch the ball into the net and perhaps set the Northern Lights ablaze. A wonderful start here in Gothenburg. Aberdeen lead Real Madrid by 1-0, and the fans are just a riot of red and white.
They've got 5 in the red shirted wall with 1 in the middle of that, and that's Thomas Gravison, now 2 and Yuri Yarashik. Nakamura with the left, oh, the goal!
Celtic Park goes absolutely wild. They're in 7th heaven, and Celtic are now on course for a place in the last 16. Unbelievably, with under 10 minutes left, it is Celtic 1, Man United 0. A golden gift, the left foot of Nakamura from 35 yards. Absolutely brilliant.
Round of applause, please, for David Begg. David, it's brilliant to listen to your commentaries, but we can't really talk about football commentary today without first making mention of Arthur Montford, who sadly passed away last night, who was a legend of Scottish football commentary and everything else to do with Scottish football just about. And he taught you to commentate, didn't he?
He was my mentor. I don't know if you... How many take a newspaper every day? Is there anyone who doesn't take a newspaper every day? Be honest. And why don't you take a newspaper? Because it's too expensive?
I drive mostly everywhere, so I tend to just kind of get my news on my phone and stuff like that.
Well, there are not many sports broadcasters would appear on the front pages of a newspaper when they pass away. There's a wonderful tribute to in The Scotsman. He gets a full page almost to his career. And Arthur Montford worked for 70 years in the media. His dad was a sports writer. His great passion was ice hockey, and he handed that down to his son. Arthur was passionate about ice hockey. The Stanley Cup was his thing. But he was also the voice for a generation or two. He was famous for his sports jackets. He did donate a number of those to various charities and raised a lot of money for the sports jackets. But he actually was the first voice ever on Scottish television. He said, "Good evening, this is Scottish television." And Arthur Montford was the voice of Scottish television. And he was the face. And what he was a very special, caring human being. He cared about the people who worked with him. I think other broadcasters care about themselves more than their colleagues. You could never say that about Arthur Montford. He was very good to the camera. He was gentle with the director, the floor manager, all the people with whom he dealt. Would have nothing but good words to say about Arthur Montford. And it's just an easy style. He was able to take instructions in his earpiece, which would be saying to him, Arthur, we've got nothing left to fill for the next 5 minutes, over to you. And he could still make sense, and it would all come out as meaning something intelligible for the viewer. I mean, I found that very difficult to begin with. You have to almost split your mind in two, because all the time I'm commentating, I'm getting instructions as to where to go next. There's been a goal at Celtic Park, and I'm at Ibrox trying to concentrate on what's happening between Rangers and Hearts. And Arthur was brilliant at handling instructions in his earpiece, because remember, it wasn't like now where you could just press a button and the video immediately played. It was having to get the machine to warm up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And so Arthur had to fill for that exact time and run the clips. He was very encouraging to young people, and I'd like Tom, please get in touch as long as I'm around and not pushing up the daisies. You do get in touch, because we are here to pass on our experience, our mistakes, our knowledge. And Arthur was very good to me. My background in sport was pretty limited, really, until 1978. I was a computer salesman. I had been a grave digger. I'd done all sorts of interesting jobs as a student, because it was pretty tough in those days as well to make ends meet. I mean, the grant in 1964 when I started uni was £290, and my hall of residence was £110 for the term. So you could see immediately there was a deficit in there, and that to me was quite a lot of money, because I didn't want to overwork in the summertime. I wanted to be a pro golfer, but my dad wouldn't let me take that path. I had a job in Canada all lined up. So I had no great background in sport. I then worked for Burroughs selling computers for 10 years, became the PGA secretary, disagreed with how the tour was run in Scotland, and resigned with a wife pregnant, a 2-year-old son, a 14-year-old Beetle as a car, a £15,000 mortgage and a £10,000 overdraft. So I wasn't really in great shape when I set off as a freelance. And I decided, with the encouragement of one of Tom's predecessors in the Scotsman, Ian Wood, and Eddie Roger of the Glasgow Herald, who were two of the sports editors around at that time, that I would write about golf initially. So I started and earned £250 in 6 months. It was a pretty difficult gig, and the overdraft was getting bigger, and the mortgage was just and no more getting paid with help from family and friends. And one night I went down to London for a match between the golf writers of Scotland and England, and the guys in Scotland were kind enough to invite me to join them. And I shared a room with the late Murdo Macpherson, not a name that any of you will remember, but he was the broadcasting minister who also presented sports programmes, and he was very encouraging of lame ducks, and I was a real lame duck at that point. And Murdo said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Not a lot, I could give you some work." And so I did the first and second division roundups of the 6 or 7 matches that were played on a Saturday. I was hopeless at it, absolutely hopeless at it. And eventually he comes into the studio one day and he said, "We're looking for a second commentator." And I said, "Well, I would like a go at that." He said, "Would you? Never thought of you." So at that point I went to Arthur Montford, because obviously he was someone who would know how to do commentary. He had presented over 2,000 programmes on Scotsport in his career. And I said, "Arthur, how do you do it? And what are the do's and the don'ts?" Now, you've seen I've got 2 bags here. I was going to talk to you about the commentator's bag and what I might have in here. But basically, this is a new bag. So this hasn't been around the gantries of Europe. But inside this bag, because I often finished up sitting in my bag, it gave me a view over the head of tall journalists like Tom English. And inside this bag there's one that's seen a bit of action. You know, it's been around the commentary boxes of Europe. And what Arthur Montford did was, he said, get yourself a clipboard. And so I got a clipboard. And this is the clipboard, and it's done 30 odd years in the bag. And I was very pleased that I'd got this clipboard. And I'll come back to that story in a minute. But he said, in this clipboard, put down an A4 sheet of paper. So we have an A4 sheet of paper. And he said, draw a line down the middle. And on this side, put one team, and on this side, put the other team. And the test commentary we were given to do was 10 minutes of an Old Firm game, Rangers against Celtic, back in the May, I think it was the May or April, May of 1980. And the other person being trialled was one Roddy Forsyth, whom you will know from his work on 5 Live and his writing in the Daily Telegraph, among others. So I had to do that and put down this empty sheet. And Arthur also gave me some advice. He said, first thing that you don't do is you don't swear. Because it is very easy to let your language run away and get very excited. And that was a rule that I managed to observe for the 32 years of my career at the BBC. I nearly did it once. Some of you may have read my little piece about this. But when Chris Iwelumo missed against Norway, I was sure he had scored. The ball's in the net. Because I could see the wee linesman flag down, heading back to the halfway line. And suddenly he stopped. And I stopped, and I thought, he's effing missed it. But I didn't say that, because all I could see was this disembodied ball bouncing around the blaze track behind the goal, away to the left at Hampden. So that's one piece of advice I would give you. If you're into broadcasting, don't swear. The second thing, and this is even more important, is don't talk about anyone when there's a microphone around. Because it may be live and you wouldn't know it. You may not be broadcasting at the time, but it could be getting recorded. And as sure as God made green apples, that recording will be played back to the individual concerned. And in 1982, for example, Peter Lorenzo, who was a very famous broadcaster in the 70s and 80s, was producing me in the World Cup in Spain. And I had a terrible start to the World Cup. I tried to do a Brazilian-type goal, you know, goal. It was only against New Zealand, for God's sake. So Kenny Dalglish had scored. You know, bonkers. Just lost the plot completely. And I was sharing commentary. That Radio 5 and Radio Scotland have different styles. Radio 5 have 2 commentators and 1 summariser. Scotland tend to have 1 commentator only and 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 summarisers. So George Hamilton was my co-commentator, Frank McClintock was the summariser, and I still had my cans on when Lorenzo came on to George Hamilton. Well done, George. Thank God for you, that bloody mad Scotsman. I said, Peter, if you have anything to say it to me. Oh, I didn't know you were listening, David. So, you know, he was breaking the core rule of don't talk about anyone. And actually we got on very well. The game against Brazil, I rather understated David Nary's toe poke. And the rest, as they say, is history. And that's really how I got started. But it would not have happened for me had it not been for Arthur Montford. We shared a passion for golf, and we drove every Saturday morning down to Glasgow Gales at Irvine, just along the road from you. And we would tee off at 8 o'clock. We would come into what they called the Dirty Bar, and we would read the newspapers, because the newspapers were valuable sources of information for any commentator going off to do his job. Arthur would then head for whichever ground he was going to. Usually he would make sure it was Capello, because he was a passionate Greenokian. His great regret, I can tell you, was that he was never in the bath at Hampden with the Scottish Cup. He always wanted Morton to win the Cup, and sadly it didn't happen in his lifetime. But he was a fantastic human being. He did so much good work for charity without getting any praise. And I cannot believe, despite having tried now for 10 years to get him an OBE or an MBE or a CBE, that he wasn't recognised in the honours system. I mean, there can be few people in the media who worked for 70 years without that recognition. He was also the rector of the University of Glasgow. He was the only rector at the University of Glasgow not to be honoured with an honorary degree, because he fought the corner of students. So much of what you will fall heir to is down to Arthur Montford.
And how do you start off being a like? What did Arthur say to you? I mean, other than how does the preparation go beyond the A4 paper? And
you build up your commentary experience, and I've got examples which I can hand round and show you. But I eventually evolved to a system of stickers, as you do. So for the two teams, I would have a sticker for every player, and there would be a piece of information there, and it's all down to hard work. Tom's right. It's your commentaries are not by accident. They happen because of hard work. So there'd be information about his age, his height, his weight, his previous clubs, his goals scored in that campaign, his total goals in his career. If there was a landmark coming, and I used to always keep my own records, so these strips could be picked out, and down the strip you would put down whoever was there. So you finished up with this. So instead of a blank piece of paper, I would sit in front of me this pad, which could have 1, 2, 3 or 4, and eventually I also had another pad that could take 6 sheets of information. For a major game, I would have maybe 1,000 facts in the hope that I could use maybe 4. You don't want your commentaries to become Statfest, and especially not on radio, because actually all most listeners really want to know is, what's the score? Give me the bloody score. And you could be listening for 10 minutes and a guy doesn't give you the score, you've gone. You're away to another station because they're in competition. And on the other side, I would have the team's information order, the league records, bits about the referee, bits about the stadium, just bits to give a bit of colour if the game wasn't good. There were some dire games. The worst series were games involving Clyde and Airdrie and Hibernian and Aberdeen a couple of years ago. The game at Easter Road was beyond belief. And I had almost lost the will to live. But you still have to try and keep an audience entertained as best you can. So there's no substitute for hard work. There are so many sources now of information. Don't trust Wikipedia. It's a good source of backup. Have your own records. If you're lazy, you can go to Wikipedia. If you see someone like Stan Collymore, he's actually got a little system where he's got a screen in front of him and all that information now on an iPad. And I think I would have evolved to that had I been younger at the time. I mean, it's taking me all my time to get a mobile phone, as Annie would famously tell you. I was the last person to have a mobile phone. I still don't switch it on unless I'm making the call. I might pick up the odd message now and again and get back to you. I will get back to any of you who come on to me at Twitter. If you're needing help, if you want to go to a game and do a commentary, a dummy commentary, I'll sit alongside you and make notes and try and help you. Never ever be scared to ask for help from senior colleagues, because we are all part of the same team. I never ever shrank away from asking journalists, what happened there, what was the score? And they have many, many more contacts than I ever had. But I worked hard to get contacts with the managers, not so much with the players. I didn't deal with the players very often, but I did deal with all the managers. And I would go to them and say, how are you going to play today? And they would tell me, because they would know it wouldn't go any further until the first ball was kicked. And then it would be obvious to everybody. And then I could look at it and see, yes, that's the way they're playing, or no, he's changed his mind, he's doing something different. So the managers were really important to me. I got the runaround, for example, from Jock Stein back in '82. I was working for Radio 2 as it was. 5 Live didn't exist at that point. It's only just 20 years old now. And the first game was against New Zealand, and I said to Jock, when will we get the team? And his answer was very clever and cute. He said, the players will be available at 12:30 tomorrow. So I then sat down to watch the first game in the World Cup and get a phone call from Radio 2, where's your piece on the Scotland team? I said, no, it's not out until tomorrow at 12:30. It's out, believe you me, it's out. PA have just put it on the wire. And of course what had happened was the writers, because we do tend to split in Scotland, unlike any other country in the land, the writers had gone in, they had put pressure on Stein to get the team, in particular Alec Cameron, who had a hold over Jock Stein, Alec Cameron had the record, and he gave them the team. Now what he had said to me was true. The players would be available at 12:30. But the announcement of the team was that afternoon. So I was made to look rather stupid. And I went to him the next day and said, Jock, you and I are going to have to work together. I'm a young guy trying to make my way in this business. I was only 2 years in the door doing the World Cup. And I said, don't ever do that to me again. You've just made me look really, really foolish. And he was being given cash by the BBC for his cooperation, and that wasn't him off to a good start. And he never again let me down. He always told me what was going to happen next. Depending on who it is, Neil Lennon will walk past most of the TV and radio broadcasters, but there's always someone who will give you help with the team. With Martin O'Neill, John Robertson or Steve Wolford would always mark our card. So you can't have too much information, you can't have too many contacts, as Tom said, and just work at it and you'll make the breakthrough. I mean, I was absolutely hopeless right at the beginning. There was a commentary there from the Aberdeen Cup Winners' Cup final, and that was really sad in a way because we didn't have a professional footballer as the summariser. David Francie shared commentary with me. He was a name that some of you will know, and he died recently. But David Francie really was the legend and the great Scottish commentator, because we didn't have television, remember, in the 60s as we've got it now. You can watch over 1,000 games live. My wife thinks I do watch 1,000 games live every year. But David Francie was a great voice in Scotland, and he was my summariser and I was his summariser. Now that's unthinkable now. You go into Radio 5 and Jimmy Armfield or whoever is alongside John Murray. If you go to Radio Scotland, you get Murdo MacLeod or you get Billy Dodds or whoever. And summarisers can teach you so much, but David and I were both commentators. And I had a rather posh style. Johnson, up to the wing to Smith, back inside to English, cross to Maguire, oh, it's a goal. And that was a bit the Bob Crampsey style. I don't know, does anybody here not know who Bob Crampsey is? Does anybody know who Bob Crampsey is? See, Ronnie knows, Tom knows. Bob Crampsey was the brain of Britain. And Bob Crampsey was a summariser who excelled in good words. He was a wonderful human being again. And, commentators want a wee rest now and again, so you want to get a drink. And you would go to Bob for a break, and he would come back with a one-word answer. But he said to me once, I said that so-and-so was the first player to score 3 goals against Celtic since so-and-so and so-and-so. And he then said, oh, and the other goals that night were scored by so-and-so, so-and-so and so-and-so. And at the end of the game, I said to him, Bob, how did you know that? You didn't know I was going to say that. How did you know that? He said, until I was 55, if I didn't know the answer to something, I'd never heard it. Now just think about that. Everything he had heard until he was 55, he remembered. So he had the mind to die for. His life wasn't in video, but he had a fantastically retentive mind, and he was a very clever man and a very good academic as well as a teacher, and then as a writer of sports books. He's done many of the histories of the golf clubs around here, like Royal Troon and so on.
We'll do a day on Bob Crampsey, I think.
Yeah.
We need to tell them who Bob Crampsey was.
Yeah.
You talked a bit about how your voice was quite sort of received pronunciation at first, and you were sort of imitating other commentators. Do you think it's important to kind of find your own voice as a commentator?
Yes, and it evolves. I used to write down, and I don't know whether I've got it in this bag here, of these sheets. I haven't got it in this one. This was Dundee United against Radnički Niš. And it was a wonderful thing. Halilovic, Borjevic and Djordjevic, Radisavljevic and Radosavljevic were all playing. There was a big fella called Drizic, got a lot of kicks at the ball that night. But what I would often write down light and shade. Now, it's terrible to go for 90 minutes. Your listeners are going, for God's sake, give me a break. So you have to, paint pictures, lift it and lay it. And the best example of that were the Brazilian fans at the World Cup. When they had the ball in their own 18-yard line, when they got to the halfway line, when they got to the 80-yard line, I went, there's a goal. And that's what happened. And that was a rhythm that I evolved over the years. I also could never say the word "the" properly, because I said "the." Now, "the" is 2 E's. But what I was doing was elongating a word to give myself thinking time to find what the next word was going to be. And it's sometimes quite difficult to get it right. You know, there goes John Robertson down the wing holding a sandwich to his head. Now, where did that come from? He'd got a cut and it was a sponge. I knew it was something for eating. And you think it's making sense. You know, David Coleman is famous for his Coleman balls. Anybody take Private Eye? You must take Private. Come on, you're students. You must take Private Eye. Private Eye is the best magazine to learn about the things that go on in life. The real story, the inside story. If you watch Ian Hislop, you get a flavour of what Private Eye is about. But Private Eye runs a section called Coleman balls, where people make big mistakes. I can see him now. He's just around the corner, out of sight. I once said, but that's not bad for an 18-year-old. Well, in fact, of course, it's really good because he's now 21.
Interesting things like Derek Stilley was in talking to these guys, and
There's
he gave you a problem,
there's
didn't
a
he?
madcap lawyer. There is a real madcap lawyer, Derek Stilley.
Because one of the things I noticed that you say quite a lot in commentary is Stilley's got it.
Stilley's got
And
it.
when Derek Stilley was playing, it was quite confusing. You're like, Stilley got it? Or Stilley's got it?
You have to be careful. There are situations, you know, are laden with treachery. Henry Longhurst was a wonderful golf commentator back in the 50s, 60s and into the 70s. He lived in a windmill. And Longhurst would never do a commentary when Hunt and Coles were playing together. And I was given that last night at a quiz in Edinburgh where there was a team and he could have a spoonerism and transfer them over and really look very silly and be rather embarrassed. I mean, the one thing you must always try and do in radio, and you can see now why I was in radio and not television, I had a great face for radio, but the one thing you mustn't do in radio is dry up. And that was my fear initially, that I would dry up. I wouldn't have anything to say. Actually, it's not such a problem because you're reacting to what you're seeing on the pitch. And, you know, I still react to my own golf swing when the ball's heading for the bushes. I'm saying, you know, whatever. But every so often, broadcasters will lose it. And it's really funny when they do, but not for the producer. And with respect to the girls in the audience here, I was doing a commentary on Clyde against Airdrie, another fantastic series of matches. I did 9 games at Broadwood before I saw a goal. And it became a bit of a laugh. How could we brighten up the commentary? And at half-time we had a sweep for when the first train from Twecker would pass by on the horizon. However, before we got to that, Charlie Nicholas, who was the summariser, whom you would see on Jeff Stelling's excellent programme on Sky, if you've got Sky, and watch that on a Saturday afternoon. Charlie Nicholas suddenly dropped into the commentary. He likes it from behind. At which point, wee Chick Young, who's the trackside reporter, goes... And you know, most of these things go right over my head, because I was almost 30 seconds behind the other guys. And then Gordon Smith goes... And suddenly, I think back, what? Oh yeah, right, I've got it now. And I burst out laughing. And there's silence in the airways, and the producer back in the studio was a guy called Donald Garden, who's an Ayrshire living down, I think, in Troon now. And Donald's screaming in the headphones, I need words! I need words! I need words! So the words were duly composed eventually, but we had about 45 seconds of airtime. The best guy losing the plot was Brian Johnson, and he and his summariser in the cricket lost the plot when somebody couldn't get the leg over. And the producer, Peter Marshall, tore strips off them after that. It was really funny. I can remember almost crashing the car on the Kingston Bridge when I heard it live. Jonathan Agnew and Brian Johnson. And they only worked together once more, and they lost it again. They just carried on from where they'd left off. And, you know, you need to compose yourself. You have to be professional. People like David Vine was told of the death of his wife in the middle of a broadcast and somehow composed himself and was able to carry on. Now, you might say that's hard and heartless, but when you're exposed to opportunity, you have to deliver as well.
You're not alone as a commentator. Like, to me, it kind of strikes when you're up in the gantry with you that you are kind of the train rattling along the track, keeping things going. But you are part of a kind of a commentary team. How do you use, like, the check track side, your summarisers, and who's good?
Well, they're all I call the summarisers the murderers of the English language. And that's not being too harsh on them, because Cramsey, again, a very educated man, said you needn't worry too much about what they say. It's how they say it, and it's their knowledge and experience. You know, I have saw him with the red boots, I have saw him with the yellow boots, and now I have saw him with the green boots, famously said by Willie Miller of Dean Windass. But you are only part of a team, and we've been very fortunate in Scotland to find a fantastic presenter in Richard Gordon, who is passionate about sport. Tom talked about his passion for sport. Richard is passionate about sport. He's particularly passionate about Aberdeen Football Club. He wears his heart on his sleeve, but he hosts the programme brilliantly. And when you're then confronted with a group of people at a game, you have sometimes another commentator. And I like that. I worked for Radio 5 for a couple of years when we had the 6:05 kick-offs on a Sunday. Now, that was a very unpopular time for most people, but actually it allowed me to work for Radio 5, having worked for Radio Scotland on the Saturday, and it meant I got more money. So that was really quite good. It was all about earning some money at some points in my career. So if you had two commentators and one summariser, I used to then get the opportunity to watch the game. If, however, you're going to be the anchor man at the game with two summarisers, you would try and bounce off them. And, you know, I always said to Billy Dodds, who was the one summariser who gave me the respect of an equal. Not all of them did. Some were so precious, if they'd been chocolate, they'd eaten themselves. And you would not need me to tell you which ones are precious about their abilities. It was all me, which is something I can't stand in Colin Montgomery and golf at the moment. It's all about him, and it's not all about what you're watching. Whereas Darren Clark came in and in 5 minutes said more than Colin had said in 5 hours, because Clark knew it was the event that was the reason that you were tuning in. So you try and get your summariser to take you to another place. There's no point in him regurgitating what I've already said, if I've been accurate. Now, I wasn't always accurate. You don't always know who the goal scorer is. But take me to another area. Tell me why it has happened, not what has happened. I've hopefully told the listener what has happened, finishing on a scoreline, bringing in the summariser who explains, now Celtic need to change to a back four, they're playing three there, the fullbacks are getting down the outside, they're having a problem. Things that I wouldn't have known. Frank McClintock was brilliant at explaining to me how the Brazilians played football. He pointed out the wheel of Oscar and all the people around that group of players. It was an absolute education to work with somebody who had played the game at the highest level. And I've been fortunate in the summariser. I mean, all the managers in Scottish football have worked with me, which is another way of also getting, you know, a contact that you won't lose, because they can see that I'm really interested in the game and have some knowledge. You never had enough knowledge. You could never have enough knowledge. I mean, in here, in this bag, I've got a tape recorder. Now, I didn't tape record it so that I could glory in my own brilliance. I tape recorded it so that I could find the bad habits that were creeping in before the listeners would notice. I never yet, in 2,000 attempts, did the perfect commentary. Can't do it. It's almost impossible to do it, because things happen. And you're annoyed about one word. You might start using the same word again and again. Well, you need to avoid that word. I would write down words, do not use this word today. And there would be a string of words not to use today. So summarisers were to take me to somewhere else. Directors, you having this in your earpiece, were to take me to other grounds, and I liked that. I liked when we went to the other grounds live, because that gave the listener a break. I mean, the person who's hearing that their team's getting horsed 4-0, you know, you're still trying to keep him involved and interested. He might have kicked the radio several times, and you're always biased. Of course they know they're always biased. I mean, I remember doing a game up at Pittodrie. Aberdeen beat a Belgian side, Waterschei, 5-1. And I was doing a game at Easter Road the following Saturday. And this guy said, "Hey, you're that guy that did the commentary on Wednesday night." And you know, that guy, there's a bit of hostility in there somewhere. And I said, yeah, what's the problem? He said, "Oh, you weren't half biased." I said, "Well, not too many people in Belgium listen to Radio Scotland, you know. We try and see it to some extent from a Scottish perspective." He says, "You blue noses are all the same." What it had to do with What it had to do with Rangers, Lord only knows, but he clearly had a chip in his shoulder because Hibs were about to play Rangers that day, and he would have it that I would be a blue nose. And they often, but the listener really only wants to know what is the score. And a friend, Sandy Bannerman, pulled me up one day and said, you were terrible on Saturday, you never gave me the score. And I listened back to the game and I'd given the score 90 times in 90 minutes. But it still wasn't enough because he had joined it for a 3-minute spell in which I didn't give the score. And radio doesn't have a little caption at the top. Digital radio could have. I mean, they could do that. And that would be great if they did that. And that would also help because there's no doubt television has great benefits over radio in terms of the visual. And you can also turn down the sound on television and make your own commentary. It's hard to do a commentary sitting at home watching it on TV. Again, preparation. I used to watch DVD after DVD, so much so that Gordon Strachan said to me one day, where did you get that? I could have done with that game. Where did you get that? I said, well, that's for me to know and you to find out. Because he was very unhelpful at times until he suddenly realised that actually I did some homework. And Rangers had provided me with the said video. Of the Moscow sides playing, because they had a little technician, and technicians, I cultivated them, who prepare the little edits that the manager wants put together for the next game. Technicians are great sources of material, so I would often go into a game knowing almost as much as the manager of the Scottish side about the opposition coming up.
So preparation's a big part of it, knowing your summarisers. In terms of the kind of person that makes a good commentator, I remember speaking to Rob McLean, who's done presentation. He's also done commentary. He still does commentary on radio. And he said to me about probably 15 years ago now, I'll never be a great commentator because I can't just let go in the moment and express that ecstasy or agony of watching that game of football. But it's not just about letting yourself go completely and becoming just shouty. Or how do you get that balance? What's the right balance?
It's very hard. I mean, I only got recognition really when I retired from my other life. My other life was running media centres, and I could talk about that in golf to you. But I only got any recognition from 1997 onwards. I'd already done commentary and been fired once in the late 1980s for being too frenetic by the late Malcolm Kellard and young Derek Ray, who now works for ESPN and for BT Sport, came in as a teenager to do a Scotland-England game, and that was front page news as well. Where's this young guy come from? But that happens, and I just refused to go away. And that was another thing I learned from Arthur Montford. He was fired by Scottish Television as well, 12 years from the end of his career, but he just said, I'm not going. And that gave him a problem to deal with, So don't give in. I offered to go to see Forfar for Stirling Albion, and the guy said, are you okay with that? I said, yeah. Because things change. Sports editors come and go and depart. But I think you've got to be enthusiastic. I think you've got to have a certain level of enthusiasm. I love sport. My great regret is that I didn't take up curling 55 years before I did. I only discovered curling when I was 60. And it really is a fantastic sport to be a participant in. Very skillful, full of angles. And a great group of people do curl, and it can take you around the world if you're good. You see Eve Muirhead and her success at the moment. That's a fantastic sport. So you've got to have a level of enthusiasm. You can't read too much. Tom was so right about that. Read gives you a breadth of vocabulary and language, and I wouldn't pretend to be a wordsmith, but you can't read too much. I would say to all of you, you should be already linking in with our local newspaper. If you haven't done that now, do it. I started as a 14-year-old working for the Stirling Observer and the Stirling Journal doing match reports on the 4th and Hendrick League. The local team was Kippen. Sometimes I played in the games latterly, so Begg was always a star man. But do get in touch with your local newspaper in the summertime, in the holidays. Clubs are crying out for publicity, and editors in the hard-pressed, compacted world that Tom spoke of are desperate for free copy. But I'll tell you, as a training ground, it's a terrific thing to do. Use the other people around you. You are part of a team. The commentator isn't the be-all and end-all. And, you know, just learn by experience. You will make mistakes. I got a goal wrong down at Somerset Park, not too far from here, and it was a penalty. Well, how could you get the score of a penalty wrong? But it was Dunfermline, and Dunfermline had black and white vertical stripes with a red number running through. Not a clue. One guy placed the ball, and another guy ran up and hit it. And it was only the following morning when I opened the paper I realised that Trevor Smith had scored the goal. Because Trevor Smith had been the guy that hit the ball, but somebody else had put it on the spot. And numbers, and there was a blizzard at the same time. So you get it wrong, and, well, tough. You get it wrong. That's the best you can do, is correct it. I remember once doing a game in Austria, in the Prater Stadium, and Celtic were playing, and Vienna scored, and my summariser was a journalist. In the early days, it was journalists who were the summarisers, not former players or managers. So Phil McEntee of the Sunday Express was the summariser, and I turned to him hoping he could bail me out at point, because the summarisers, good summarisers, will actually be watching the game and will tell you, see that you're struggling to get the goal scorer, and will go. And there are some you learn to trust because they would get it right, and there are others you don't trust at all because they would get it wrong and hadn't a clue either. And Phil McEntee, to his credit, didn't know who had scored, so he wandered down to the press box, which was 50 rows below us. I mean, at Hampden we are 208 yards from the commentary position to the far corner flag. It is a long way, and it's not always easy with some of the jerseys that are now around. So if you get a summariser at the point, that was a really big help.
Is it not just physically draining as well, commentating? Because being up in the gantry watching you sometimes at Hampden, and you will actually literally be almost blue in the face by the end of the match.
Well, I'm pretty florid as it is, you know. And blood pressure, I would hate to think what my blood pressure must have been at times. Because I can remember doing the World Cup final in 2006, and my summariser was 1,000 miles away from me. Literally 1,000 miles away. He was in a studio in Glasgow. In the 1998 World Cup final, the summariser was again in Glasgow. I was in Paris, and Chick Young was in a studio in Paris. And yet we linked the broadcast so well that John Barnes said he didn't know that we were separate until I did the presentation, which would normally have been done by Richard Gordon, for the presentation of the trophy. I was florid in the face. I was exhausted. After a game, you're still pumped with adrenaline, and it takes you a long time to calm down. And I went to a stress management course, and the girl said, you should have had 10 heart attacks by now, because you really aren't very fit. And what you must do after a game is go and have a cool down, warm down. Go for a brisk walk, get rid of all the lactose that's flowing through your veins. It is hard work, but if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And I gave it my best shot in every game, whether it was Hibs 0, Aberdeen 0 or not. I mean, you're just thinking, what the hell do I say now? But, you know, you've got to work hard because the listeners are due that. And I think they get good value on radio. I mean, I enjoyed radio more than the very little television I did do. I did one game for Rangers TV. It seemed to go okay, but it was a dire game between Rangers and Hamilton Accies. I also did highlights for Scope. None of you would remember this, but there was a company called Scope used to package the highlights of the Premier Division. I think it was only 5 games in those days. It was a Premier Division of 10. And all of these would arrive by courier from Aberdeen. They weren't fed in directly to the studio. And one night I had to do 30 minutes of commentary on 5 different games without a break and with no retake. Because one of the bikers had crashed on his way down the road from Aberdeen, another had got held up and the tape only arrived in time, and we got the tape to the BBC from the studio in Blythewood Square. We got the tape to the BBC with 1 minute to on air. So that was pressure.
That's stress. These guys are journalists, so I'm going to get them to ask some questions.
Unfortunately.
We're getting chucked out.
We're getting chucked out.
Right now?
Yeah, there's a class coming in at 12 o'clock. I don't know if David is up for it. We could go and take over Starbucks for 10 minutes if we have an informal chat there.
Or I can come back another time. If you think it's worthwhile, if you think it's interesting, if I haven't bored the pants off you, you know.
You can come back any time.
Well, you know, it's about that. But as Tom said, if you need to get in touch, if you're going to take on a project, you know, don't hesitate to ask for help.
A round of applause for David.